Pitch Talks special feature.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, straight shooting LJA, the G-Man, Jazzy Fizzle, Nathan Arsenal, and
JBK
proudly bring to you another Pitch Talk special feature. Now, what we're going to go into, obviously you can see I'm wearing my Ibis Eagles jersey, grassroots football. And of course, Jamie being an FA qualified and a licensed coach, it's one of them where we can only go one way. Grassroots football in England suspended during lockdown from the 3rd of November 2020. It's part of the reason why we're wearing these masks. All adult and children's...
Not social distancing, by the way.
Well, at least we're taking one precaution. But grassroots football in England suspended during lockdown. All adults and children's grassroots football is to be suspended in England during the national COVID-19 lockdown. Restrictions will run from Thursday, 5th of November until Wednesday, 2nd of December, at least. Just want to put that stipulation in. No men's teams in leagues lower than the National Leagues North or South will be able to train or play, and women's competitions below the second tier championship are also suspended as well. The women's part we're going to hit on another special feature, so hang tight for that one. Right now we're just focusing on the grassroots segment. The restrictions also apply to all youth and indoor teams, but lower league sides can play in the FA Cup. This is where we're going to kind of focus on. Non-elite teams in the FA Cup first round will play and train under elite conditions for as long as they remain in the competition. So there is that little stipulation there. Our aim is to ensure that the 2020-2021 season is completed at these levels, and will liaise with the relevant leagues in the NLS, National League System, and WFP, Women's Football Pyramid, and County Football Associations to provide support and establish appropriate options to do so if required, an FA statement read. Restarting football at all these levels has taken substantial determination and commitment from stakeholders across the game, and we would like to thank everybody for their vital contributions. However, health and well-being remain the priority, so it's extremely important that clubs, players, coaches, match officials, league officials, volunteers, parents, carers, and facility providers, a lot of people in there, adhere to the UK government's new national COVID-19 restrictions during this period. Youth sport will actually be limited to schools. There were calls for youth sport to be exempt when the new restrictions came into effect on Thursday, 5th of November, but Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden confirmed it would only be permitted in school. Unfortunately, we need to pause grassroots sport outside school to reduce the transmission risk from households mixing, he tweeted, which is quite interesting in and of itself, but we'll come back to that. As soon as we can resume this, we will. Elite sport can continue behind closed doors during the lockdown. Former Wales midfielder Robbie Savage, who coaches a junior team, has actually criticised the decision to suspend children's sport in a series of tweets. Quoting Dowden's tweet, he said, "Have you or any of your senior government officials been to a grassroots game since lockdown? Do you have any idea what it's like for thousands of grassroots volunteers? Do you know the impact of this decision on youngsters' mental and physical well-being?" Very important question there. Chelsea boss Frank Lampard added, "I'm a massive advocate for children to play all sorts of sports, but at unprecedented times we're reliant on the government and scientists." Yeah, if you want my view on government and scientists, the straight shooting rants, and also the straight shooting view as well. Two of my vlogs on Instagram and YouTube. That's a separate issue, not going to go into that rabbit hole today. But if it can be done in a safe way, I think for physical and mental health, we must strive to do it as much as we can. It's a tough time, and I'm a father, so I do worry. I don't know all the data, but as a parent, if you can remain active and encourage your children to be active in this tough time, it's a great thing to do. I would really encourage us to find a way to keep children active, but it has to be in a safe way so we don't see long-term issues coming back from it in these youngsters' lives. Youth Sports Trust Chief Executive Ali Oliver said to BBC Sport that under a quarter of secondary schools do not offer physical education. So this comes into it too. To lose some grassroots clubs will leave us with a legacy of a generation who are inactive and unable to find a way into sport, she said. Former Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee Chair Damian Collins had written to Dowden asking the government to allow youth sport to continue in England after the 5th of November. it is one of them was where he called on the government to extend the definition of elite sport to include academy players at Premier League clubs and those in development centres, such as England Rugby Developing Player Programme and Sport England's Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme. The young people will currently be allowed to continue with sport at school, and we believe the risks to the spread of the coronavirus from outdoor grassroots youth sport would be minimal, he said, in a letter also signed by former sports ministers Tracy Crouch and Helen Grant. There would, however, be clear and lasting benefits for these young people if the government could support this. Leisure centres and gyms will close, as will other indoor and outdoor leisure facilities. And so where we are with this, I want to ask you, Jamie, as a youth coach. I mean, this is the second time during this COVID-19 pandemic that we've had a lockdown, and I would ask you first and foremost, how much of an impact do you think the first one had back in March 2020, and how much of an impact do you think this one is going to have on youth and grassroots sports, not just football? I'd like to hear your take on that first.
Two things. First of all, yes, I coach a team who are basically in primary school. For me to still have them going to school and basically still be playing football kind of defeats the whole purpose of what this lockdown really is about. And if you're trying to seclude everybody into a bubble, then why would you still have them playing outside where they can probably spread it around a park or around a primary school setting or wherever? That's my first thing. The second thing is, if I look at the two lockdowns together, the impact on it was devastating the first time because nobody knew what to do with this first pandemic. And the second one, everybody understands what the second one is. But the problem is the fact that the first one was so long that the country just physically and financially cannot allow for a 3-month lockdown. It just can't happen.
Again, do you mean allow for it again, or could it not handle it for the first 3 months?
It can't handle it again, just simply because there was a lot of people that was still sort of defying the laws, breaking the rules, and making things not working in hindsight. Like I look at the 3 months from March to about June. I didn't coach. I generally didn't coach. I may have done an odd Zoom call here and there, but I didn't coach in person, and it took a massive effect on finance for myself. But with this country being on a furlough scheme, it's going to have a massive impact on everybody financially. So what that means is, if every child's parent has to pay for a session, the problem is that none of us will be getting paid. So a lot of people will go, well, why am I going to walk out of my door, risk life and limb just to get a session on? They're just not going to do it. And if it also means that if they are breaking the rules, and it also means that they lose their license to coach, most people are going to go, no, I'm not going to do that. So the impact on the kids will be, well, what are they doing outside of this? And if their parents didn't have things in mind from beforehand, or had a very tough life beforehand, and in terms of, and what I mean by tough life is that they had to go to work to provide, and that's all they kind of knew, then the kid won't have anything to do at home. And that will be the impact. That will be the necessary impact, is what does the child do when their parent is at work? But they won't know. The only thing that they will probably know is, well, my mum's gone to work, my dad's gone to work, and that's about as good as it's going to get. Whatever happens in between that, so long as I don't get into trouble, I'm okay. But that's the problem. That has been the problem from the first lockdown to the second lockdown is that's all that's been said in terms of how does everybody deal with this lockdown. So for me, I'm going to say the first one should have been extended to probably the end of this year. It would have made more sense to do it that way than to actually go, well, we're going to have a break and then come back to it in a few months, because essentially what you've done is you started a lockdown because there were people that were complaining about it being a problem, and more so the businesses were saying, well, they're not going to have business. They've basically made the decision for the Prime Minister, in my opinion, to say, well, we need to get business running again, so we'll try and do it. And now we've gone back into a national lockdown again. So essentially, you were better off not opening businesses throughout the summer and just going, well, up until the end of the year, we'll work something out.
See, for me, the whole thing for me is especially when it comes to businesses and the elite side of the game, it's all about money. But with the grassroots side, I think the first lockdown had such a massive impact on the country in general. I think mainly because, you know, when you have something taken away, mm-hmm. when you're used to freedoms, and then you have stuff taken away, and then you wonder why when people get the opportunity to kind of come out, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to do everything I used to do, even with the restrictions. So for me, I mean, it was in terms of youth and grassroots sports, not even just football. I mean, it's had such a massive impact. The first lockdown, because at the end of the day, you look at futsal was just like, nope, gone.
Yep.
And because of this pandemic as well, one of the other concerning things for me personally, I mean, playing for a grassroots club, Ibis Eagles AFC, it's one of them where the FA mentioned about a month or so ago that over the next 3 years they're going to cut about 20 million per year for grassroots football. And it's not as if grassroots football was getting hundreds of millions and millions invested anyway. So for them to cut that off is just, it's just not good. It's not good. It's not good at all. So it's not even just football that's been impacted by this. There are other sports, and especially youth sports as well. And funnily enough, actually, there actually is a youthsporttrust.org. They've actually done an evidence paper about the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on children and young people. And Youth Sport Trust is a children's charity that works to ensure every child enjoys life-changing benefits that come from play and sport. They do it by harnessing the power of sport, physical activity and PE to increase young people's life chances through improved well-being, healthier lifestyles and greater attainment. And they have actually, as I said, they've done an evidence paper that kind of surmises the effects on children and young people of the restrictions. I mean, the first one, restrictions, I'll give you the cocktail napkin versions. We'll put a link in the description that you can read the details. But restrictions imposed as a result of COVID have had substantial and wide-ranging health implications for young people's mental health and well-being. For some, these impacts may be deep and long-lasting. Many organizations are not set up to respond to the increased demand. At least 1/3 of children have experienced an increase in mental health issues, including stress, loneliness, and worry. More than two-fifths, 41% of children and young people aged 8 to 24 say that they are lonelier now than before the restrictions were put in place. More than 1/3 say that they are more worried, 38%. 37% are sadder or more stressed, 34%. And a third report that they've had more trouble sleeping. Boredom, 51%. Worry, 28%. And feeling trapped, 26%, are the top 3 emotions experienced by children and young people. 2/3 of primary school children report feeling lonely. It's 50% up on normal levels. And Amongst girls, 24% of those aged 11 to 14 and 50% of those aged 15 to 18 report that COVID-19 and lockdown has had a negative effect on their mental health. 33% of girls aged 4 to 10 say that they feel sad most of the time, and 42% of girls aged 15 to 18 feel stressed or worried. Their key concerns are uncertainty about school and education. 76% of them felt that way. Loneliness and isolation, 51%. A lack of freedom and independence, 44%. Younger girls aged 4 to 10 report that they miss their friends, 95%. And speaking as a dad myself, that sounds pretty accurate, to be perfectly frank. Their teachers, 79%, and playtime, 59%. Older girls aged 11 to 18 miss school trips, events and celebrations, 70%. Learning, 50%, and school sports, 29%. Older children, 16 to 19, is where it's interesting as well, are also worrying about life after lockdown. So that's 73% are worried about the future, and 59% say that their well-being is being affected. Key concerns for those aged 14 to 25 are about those close to them being at risk, 61%, and the strain on the NHS is 42%, and a future economic crisis at 34%. Now, I mean, COVID also is leading to uncertainty about future employment as well. More than a quarter, 29% of 16 to 25-year-olds feel that their future career prospects may have been damaged. 46% believe that finding a new job now feels impossible. And 1/3 feel that everything they've worked for is now going to waste. 69% feel their life is on hold, and almost half, 47%, don't feel in control of their lives, rising to 65% for those not in education, employment, or training. There has been a significant deterioration in mental health in recent months for all young people, but particularly those of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic (BAME) origin, who appear to be suffering disproportionately worse damage to their mental health than their white peers. KOOTH, KOOTH, who provide online mental health support for children and young people, report that 51,321 requests for help. Of those, 7,482 were from a BAME background. The number of BAME children contacting them with suicidal thoughts went up by 26.6% versus 18.1% for white children. And I mean, also self-harm incidents with an increase of 29.5% for BAME versus 24.9% for everyone else. I mean, it's one of them. Was calls to Childline have increased as well. The NSPCC conducted over 2,200 counselling sessions to children and young people between 21st of January and 8th of April 2020, of which 1,600 were delivered in March when government restrictions were introduced. So it's one of them ones where it's like there's a lot of things that are being exacerbated. Existing issues obviously are being exacerbated, and it's so sad to see this because I mean, the children are the future. No ifs, no buts. The children are the future. And again, Jay, I'd like to ask you as well, as a youth football coach yourself, how did the lockdown back in March affect you as a coach and you as a person as well? Especially, and did you see in the one-to-one sessions that you do, did you see any of those youngsters exhibiting any kind of feelings of anxiety, depression, or other things?
In the first lockdown, I'll explain it this way. I was ready to quit football. I hadn't been in it for as long as a lot of people would suggest, but 16 years feels like a long time. I think that was my biggest thing. Watching the sessions that I was doing, it just felt like I was in a trance, and I was just like, well, I can't do this anymore. But then there was a bit of a reprieve, and I started off Believe and Achieve coaching. So my clientele grew a little bit over Zoom calls, and it made a difference, and things were steadily working in my favor. To the point where I said, well, I'll do a U-turn and maybe I'll stick with stick with football for a little while longer to see what it would give me. In terms of the impact on the kids, I didn't really see anything because there was more happiness behind it. There was more like they wanted to be there. They wanted to just kick a ball about. They just wanted to do something.
So it's a case of something's better than having something is better than having nothing.
Basically, and it was the same for me. I enjoyed it, and I found myself enjoying a lot more one-to-one sessions than actually doing team sessions, just simply because you can work with those players a little bit more. You can see what they do a little bit more of, and see what they tend to fear and things like that. So you get to know the player a little bit more clearly than just putting them into a position and hoping for the best. And that was one of the things that I massively looked at for those players, is that they now started to recognise that I was interested in how they would develop. And a lot of players have come back to me over the past few years, over the past few weeks before the lockdown, and said that their game massively improved after we worked together. And I thought, well, that's what it should be. That's how it should be. If you're still the same player after we work together, then I haven't done my job. One of the things that I do as a coach is I set people up to the next level with new ideas, not try and teach them at the level that they're at now. I try to set them up for what they will feature in the next few years. So again, if somebody says, well, why do you work on passing? It's because I'm not going to be their coach for the rest of their life. I can't be. It's physically impossible for them just to continue hearing the same voice for 60 years. It's not going to happen. So if they were to stay in the game for the next 50 years, I wouldn't be their coach for the next 50 years. I'd be their coach for the next maybe 4 or 5. Whoever they get after that needs to know that they've been given the right information and worked on it as much as they can, so that all they've got to work on next is maybe the next level for that person. And that's how I coach. I try not to coach with the goal in mind to know that what they're coaching is for their age group now. I'm trying to coach them for what they're going to be next time. And that's what I think the lockdown will come as, especially with some of those numbers, or maybe all of them. I look at all of them, and I look at the negative impact that everybody has come out with in terms of depression, in terms of feeling lonely, in terms of missing friends, in terms of not having something to do, in terms of boredom, in terms of just not finding that they enjoyed going to football, or enjoyed going to the sport that they love, whether it be football, rugby, tennis, ice hockey, outdoor hockey, rugby, anything. It could have been anything, and they felt happy doing it because they were in a social environment where it's gonna affect their happiness in a good way. But then it's been ripped away from them by somebody who doesn't know them. And that was the key thing for me, is that a lot of them didn't understand it. So psychologically, everybody was going, well, I don't understand why I can't see my friends. Well, you can't see your friends because if one of them was to happen to make you sick, we could never forgive that person. That's usually...
So do you think understanding the restrictions and then being explained better, because obviously they were not explained well by the government, and the amount of U-turns, I mean, I've personally been saying that this government has had more U-turns than a toddler trying to play Mario Kart for the first time. And do you think there could have been a lot better explanation as to what the restrictions were going to entail? Do you think these numbers, the numbers that I just threw out from U Sports Trust, do you think those numbers would have been a lot lower if things had been explained better from the outset, rather than saying, right, we're doing this and then coming back?
No. And the reason why I say that is it's a bit like being in a football team itself, or being in any team sport. You're going to have different characters to work with. Some will accept that certain things are going to happen. However much you explain it, you can explain it to a person for about 2 hours. They're going to shut off in about 10 minutes. Within the first 10 minutes, you've probably lost them. If you've lost that person within the first 10 minutes, you're probably not going to get them back for another 3-4 months, which is fine. But then you might have somebody who's invested fully in the 2 hours that you're sitting there trying to explain everything, and they've taken everything in. They've understood everything that you've said, and you know what? They're very clear in what needs to be done. So then that's the thing for me. Some will accept what has happened. Some will try to fight against it. And the reason for this lockdown, in my opinion, for the second lockdown, is because of those who fought against it, and found ourselves pretty much in the second lockdown because they wouldn't wear the mask, despite needing to do so, or just having it on your persons. In my opinion, if you just have it on your persons, then nobody can actually say anything to you. But the fact that most people went, oh, I forgot it, it's in my car, or I left it at home, and then still was able to go out and do what they needed to do in the shops, means that we're back to square one. I'll look at the situation that happened in Spain. Spain closed their borders to everybody. Spain's ports or touristy places make a lot of money off of holiday makers. Now, because all of that was shut down, they almost went into a recession. Now, if you look at that in that context, they opened up their doors way too early and then had to go back into a national lockdown again. So if that is the case, well, then we're no different to Spain as anybody else is to Portugal or any other place. The difference between maybe Germany, Portugal, and New Zealand is that they looked at the one thing that was going to be a problem, which was businesses, and said, well, your health comes first, let's deal with that. And they made health a priority rather than a necessity. A necessity would, in my opinion, would have been it's a necessary to put finance ahead of health because we need the money to make sure that we can find the cures a lot sooner than other countries. However, if you put it as a priority that health becomes first, then the necessity to find the money becomes doesn't have to become a priority at all. So there's the difference in the two words that I look at it as. Necessity is the finance, priority is the health. They put the health first. In New Zealand, they've just closed their doors to the last coronavirus case. Now they've got 20,000 people turning up to an international game between New Zealand and Australia, one of the biggest matches in rugby history. To me, that just speaks volumes, just simply because you went from having nobody in your stadiums and possibly no sports whatsoever to now having 20,000 watching the biggest match in history.
We also had in Hungary the Super Cup.
Yes.
Super Cup as well. It had about 20,000 fans in it as well. So it's
same thing with Germany. Germany have now brought back fans to in the bucket loads to say, well, we had to do a national lockdown. As much as our country didn't want to probably do it, we've just said, well, either you do it or you get fined. And they were very adamant on the fine. That was another thing that made a problem for this country, as well as Spain. If you look at the Spanish one, apparently one of the things was if you walk outside of your door, for anything more than just to put the bins out, you will get a €600 fine. If you get anybody else, if you get into your car with any second person, it's a €1,000 fine.
Yeah, and both of those were on the spot, no negotiations, no mucking around.
No, and that was the problem. Whereas here, there was always a reason. There was always, oh well, I had to go out because my health is being needs to be looked after, or I need to go to the doctors, or. To me, most of the problems came from the fact that nobody wanted to accept what was a lockdown. And that's why we've got a second lockdown. And I'm not saying this is a national problem. I think there are handfuls of people who have allowed the rules to be bent in so many ways where you can go, okay, well, this wasn't explained to me, so I can just do this. Or maybe I can get around this because this is the loophole within this rule. Okay, well, if there's a loophole in this rule, then expect all these problems to keep surfacing, so that every single time you want to go to the pub or you want to go to work, somebody's going to say, nope, there's a lockdown. You can't do this. You can't do that. And it just means that as a not as a national lockdown, but as a country, the people have to now decide what is more best for the future of this country. We are now in a new decade, and we seem to be still running things like we did 20 years ago. That's the problem. We still seem to be going, well, it's okay, it's going to be dealt with, blah, blah, blah. Listen, that's not how the world is still working. Again, if anybody's having a look at what's going on in America at the moment, the voting should have been finished 2 days ago. The reason why it hasn't is because a president has decided that he wants to make sure that he's still in charge of whatever free world that he needs to be in charge of. But he's not, and all these extra votes are actually going against him because he wants a recount.
Well, let's not get too.
I'm not gonna get bogged down in the politics. But what I'll say is this: so long as we keep finding reasons to not do the right thing, we're gonna keep going through these lockdowns week in, week out to say, well, what's the truth about what are we meant to be doing?
Pitch Talks special feature.